special for me because back in the early 70s, when I got interested in jazz music and playing drums, I had the pleasure of seeing the Ken Collier Jazzmen, and they were playing in, I think I saw them first in Bishop Stortford in Hertfordshire, and then they came to Harlow, and I saw them a number of times in that period. And what struck me was the excitement generated by their drummer. Now, bear in mind that I was very fresh to all of this, and this was a voyage of discovery, and I was also listening to other jazz bands that were on the circuit, and there were two drummers that I heard in those days that particularly struck me as having something very special, but I didn't know what it was. They had that pulse, that drive, that urge, that swing. One of them was Ron McKay, who was with Max Colley's band, and I later discovered he'd been in Ackerbilt's most famous band in the late 1950s, and he was a driving drummer and a very, very accomplished player. Sadly, he's retired now and is not too well. And then I saw the Max Colley band playing in Hatfield in Hertfordshire with a Depp, and the Depp was the drummer that I'd seen with Ken Collier's Jazzmen, and I was absolutely knocked out by the drive and the excitement that this guy caused. Now, drums, you know, they're a fairly physical instrument, and the basic kit remains fairly constant. They have different sizes and different ways of tuning them, but you've basically got a snare drum, you've got a bass drum, you've got two tom-toms generally, you've got some cymbals and wood blocks and all of that sort of thing. So the basic setup is fairly constant amongst most of the drummers that you'll see on the circuit today. But it is what the drummer does with it that really makes the difference. And I was very lucky to hear the recordings of Baby Dodds, who is the father of jazz drumming, when he was recorded later on in life, talking about his influences and what makes a good drummer. He said, drummer's got to have a good spirit. You can't have an evil spirit. If you have an evil spirit, you play drums evil. So you've got to have a good spirit. And he said, you've got to play for the benefit of the band, and you've got to give each soloist something different. You've got to colour your style, in other words, and you've also got to play dynamically and all this sort of thing. Well, of course, the man that our wonderful guest was inspired by himself was, of course, Baby Dodds. And to my ear, there is no one playing drums that nowadays quite in that style. Ladies and gentlemen, Colin Bowden. And to talk to Colin, Mike Pointon, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, Colin, it's a delight to have you here.
Good morning.
Good morning. And I have to also confess that when I first saw him with the Ken Collier band, when I was thinking that maybe one day I can play, Colin was one of several fine musicians in that band who inspired me. And I think just to get the ball rolling, as it were, we'll hear what I think is still a wonderful recording from that period when Colin had just come into the Ken Collier band and transformed them. From 1956, this is.
And this is Dippermouth Blues.
78 and wore it grey.
I played it twice.
Now, there's so many things to ask you, but let me say first, Colin, now, you're in the studio with that band, and the rhythm section you'd worked with before. I mean, it was what you might call a dream rhythm section. How did you get to that point, and what inspired you to want to move into that style of music and even take up drums?
Crikey.
Several questions in one there.
I was going to say, we've got all day.
You need to use the mic.
Yeah. What got me into drums? Spike Jones. Spike Jones got me into drums with Cocktails for Two. And it was the ensemble of the Spike Jones band that got me interested in jazz. And it was Jerry Earl Morton's Oh Didn't He Ramble, with Zooty playing snare. And then, of course, the Olivers and Louis, Hot Sevens and things. And then the actual sound of the AMs I heard about 1953.
That's American music label, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one, and those magnificent things with Dodds on, and the Dodds talking records. And the band that really started to do that I played with was the Trevor Williams band, with Dick Smith and Johnny Bastable and myself. And we reckon we were the best rhythm section in the world, as you can hear from that record. And it's just a progression from those. I mean, I was in Trevor's band, and I was in Sonny's band, and I joined Ken's band. And basically, Ken, I could play the drums I wanted to play with. You know.
Do you remember what it was like in the studio on that day? Does it come back to you?
Nerve-wracking.
Was it? Your first recording?
Yeah, well, you see, you played in a studio with no echo at all. All the walls were dead, so the engineers could control the recording. And so you didn't get any bounce back. And as a jazz musician, well, me anyway, I have to hear the band. If you can't hear the band properly, if you're used to playing down the 51 and places like that, and then you go into a cold studio, you're a bag of nerves, really.
And you've been playing in the 51 Club, which was a basement club, wasn't it?
Yeah.
I remember the atmosphere so well there, a bit like an old New Orleans dance hall, we always thought.
Yeah. It's like an air raid shelter, really.
Yeah, it's also. But you'd had, before then, I know, lots of other inspirations, and what interested me, to sort of digress slightly, is that you told me, and you must be one of the few who had the privilege, you'd already heard, in what was then a more modern style, jazz at the Phil. How did that come about?
Oh, crikey. 1953. That was 1953. It was a flood relief concert. There was a musicians' ban on American musicians unless there was an exchange. So, of course, the only band that could exchange in those days was Ted Heath. And you got the odd American band come over, but otherwise you didn't see any American musicians. But Norman Granz was touring Europe with Jazz at the Phil, and he did a flood relief charity concert at the State Kilburn. And in one night I saw Lester Young, Benny Carter, Roy Eldridge, Charlie Shavers, Flip Phillips, Oscar Peterson, Ray Brown, Gene Krupa, Roy Haynes and J.C. Hurd, all in one night. And I came out the place, it was incredible, absolutely incredible. And my first experience of an American drummer was when Nat King Cole did the Palladium with a trio.
Yeah.
And I saw Lee Young, and I heard a sound that I didn't hear in Europe.
I see.
And it wasn't technique, it was feel.
Yeah.
He was playing brasses very, very simply, but it was wonderful. Just the placing of the beat. You can't describe how he did it. You just had to try and do it yourself.
Placing of the beat, that's everything, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what then, since we're in that period and that style, I think we have a clip from Jazz at the Phil, haven't we? In full flight.
Just a short bit.
An example of what they did. But that brings back a few memories, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What's interesting as far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure John also, is that although you play in New Orleans style and play it your own way, you've been inspired by so many great drummers, Art Blakey, Sid Catlett, all these great people, but what particularly drew you to Baby Dodds? Because that's the heart of your playing also. What did he teach you, would you say?
Just the patterns, really. I mean, you were playing with those things last night, and I felt, I mean, I've been listening to those records since about 1953, and I felt as if I was going back to school again. You know, he plays patterns all across the beat, but with the beat.
He wasn't a typical New Orleans drummer, was he? Would you say?
I don't know. I don't know what is a typical New Orleans drummer. I honestly don't know. I'm sorry. You know, some say the very simplistic current New Orleans drummers. I don't know. It changes.
Yeah.
I mean, you if you say what is New Orleans style, what is Dixieland style, when you actually come to the drumming, it's where you put the fill-ins and what the bass drum beat or the hi-hat writing was. It's how the drummer plays it in the idiom that he's in. To me, it's a very intangible thing. When they say you're playing New Orleans drum style, I like a jazz boffin to describe it properly because I tear it to pieces.
Yeah.
You know,
There's too many boffins, aren't there?
It's just a feel that you have, and I got hooked on Baby Dolls because of the complexity of the patterns, you know, and the tones, and the placing of the beat, whatever. You know, it's I suppose it's like somebody getting hooked on Freddie Green. You can't say why.
No.
The sound just hit me. Very first, I'd heard him on the Olivers and some of the recordings done in the 30s. And I was in a party, probably early 50s, fairly early 50s, and somebody had a 12-inch 78 of Kid Shots Madison with George Lewis playing When You and I Were Young, Maggie. And Dodds was on that, an American music recording with that characteristic sound of Baby that he got. And I heard this record for the first time, and I said to the guy, is it right to go and play this? It was 78. And he said, well, the family's away, you can go up my daughter's bedroom and play. I played on a little dance set record player, and I think I went up there about 9 o'clock in the evening. I played that 78 till 2 o'clock in the morning, over and over and over again. So it was such an incredible sound. There's so much going on, but not getting in the way. That's the thing. There's all these cross patterns and tom-toms and woodblocks and everything going on, but it doesn't get in the way. You know. Well, I suppose it's like Art Blakey or Catlett. They don't get in the way, but boy, are they playing. And it's not a feature for the drummer, you know. So he's not getting in the way, you know. Or you get somebody like help me, who's Krupa's mate?
Buddy Rich.
Yeah. Buddy Rich always has tunes geared to feature Buddy Rich. And he does his thing, and you can hear it all.
Yeah, show drumming.
It's fantastic stuff, you know, colossal technique. But the way Baby Dodds plays, he plays all his technique within the band for the benefit of the band. You said, plays for the benefit of the band.
That was his philosophy, wasn't it?
Yeah, you know.
It really was.
And he was so right.
Yeah. Someone else said, I brought a note here just to remind myself of it, how can a man possibly play drums with a band if he does not know the tunes? It is important that the drummer knows the tune as the cornet or any other instrument.
That's right. I can't count, so I have to know the tune. You ask me number of bars in the tune, I don't know.
You know the tune.
But I know where the bridges are and the where the melody goes and the carry forwards from one chorus to another and when it changes from chorus to verse, like rags and things like that.
Yeah.
But I couldn't tell you the number of bars. got no idea.
Now, as far as I know, you're one of the few drummers who still uses proper skin nowadays, is that right?
Yeah.
And you tune your drums. Now, I don't know much about these things, but we've got another drummer here. Let's have a bit of drum talk and find out a bit about these things, because a lot of people just imagine that you hit things. There's much more to it than that, isn't there?
They like women. Sorry about that.
So how do you tune? What do you hear when you're tuning your heads?
My governing sound is the radio signal for the BBC overseas service in the war. Dum 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 dum.
Ah.
Because they're a fifth apart.
Yeah. So they're tuning fifths.
So that sound is emblazoned on my mind before I even played drums. And so it's tuning fifths, yeah.
Yeah. So the mechanics of actually tuning a head, you've got a new head, and I think you make them as well, don't you?
Lap them.
You lap them, yeah.
Yeah.
So what does that process involve?
Well, you get a piece of skin.
Yeah. What skin is it?
It depends. It can be goat, it can be calf, and it could be pig.
Yeah.
Calf is usually the hardest, and you can use it for a snare drum. But then when you get to the tom-toms, depending on what sound you want, when Vic O'Brien made that kit for me, he put calf, top American calf, Reno heads on it. I took it down to 51, and about 4 hours later I took it back up to him and said, I can't tune this kit up the way I want. So he said, what sound do you want? So I said, I wanted the sound of that radio signal,
Yeah.
you know. And so he put goat on. But I think there's one goat, well the original head's on the front of the bass drum, and there's an original head on the bass tom-tom, but all the others have been changed. And I think they're pigskin now, but I go to a parchment works in Newport Pagnell, where they do parchment for books and illuminated addresses and all stuff like that, vellum for lampshades and all that. And I go upstairs, and I go through his skins with my fingers and say, I love that one. And he cuts me a piece off. But I haven't changed my heads for
Can
years.
you talk in,
Sorry,
yeah.
I haven't changed my heads for years, you know.
What about the problems of?
Can you come in a bit with the mic?
Sorry.
What about if as you go into a different room? So you've come in from the car park and you've come in here.
Well, that's what I was saying to you about playing in a recording studio.
Yeah.
He was asking about what's it like in a recording studio.
Yeah.
This room has got an acoustic feel to it.
Yeah.
So you hit your drums. I tuned the bass. The first one I hit, I've done it already. I hit the bass drum. Oh, that'd be all right. You might need tightening up or something on. But I got the sound of the room, so the bass drum's all right.
Yeah.
I'll tune the drums to resonate in this room.
Yeah.
To blum 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 blum.
And do they go out during the course of the session?
Well, I said today.
I think you need to talk right into that.
Right on the mic.
I said today that I'm down by the sea, so the air's damp.
Yeah.
But there might be a sea breeze which is dry.
Yeah.
So I just don't know what they're going to be like.
Until you start.
Until I sit down, and then I tune them. You know, and you can play on a stage, for example. They'll start going up.
Yeah.
I can remember setting my drums up in the festival hall, tuning them, getting them all dead right, then going away while the people came in. Half an hour later, I went to play them, and they were awful.
So
But that's within my mind, and maybe somebody listening won't hear it to the degree I do. But to me, it's like falling off the end of a cliff, you know, because they're not right.
Right. Mike?
Well, there's another question I'd like to raise, talking about drumming in general, and for we civilians, some of us, they talk about 2-beat drumming, 4-beat drumming, and I've got a quote here from one of Bill Russell's colleagues, and Bill was the man who set up all those American music recordings, and he says here, 2-beat drummers, there's no such thing as a number of beats, there's only the beat, I don't have to tell you about the beat, but listen to some of the better New Orleans bands. The beat is horizontal, not vertical. It is this, you breathe all the way up, then all the way in. And how do you define this business about the beat? Because there's a southern beat, people say also, compared to a lot of the bands in the north in America years ago, didn't really swing. But when New Orleans musicians went north, those bands started to swing. What do you feel about all this?
I think probably the New Orleans beat, that's the way Louis plays, is behind, is laying back on it. You know, you get your Chicago, New York rhythm sections are right on the beat or even pushing the beat all the time. You get what you call exciting jazz.
Would this be part of it then? The magic of real swing is often created by irregularities such as cross rhythms, delayed and anticipative attacks and accents, etc. How does that?
Well, that's Baby Dolls.
Well, it sounds like it, doesn't it? Yeah.
You know, yeah, you see, it's so different. Baby does it along melodic lines, I suppose. But then you hear somebody like Max Roach or Art Blakey, and they're playing drum techniques which is prodigious, tonally fantastic, but it's in a different place.
Yeah.
The bridge man, I think, is Catlett. He had a laid back beat, but he came from Kansas City, so where does it come from, really? But a hell of a lot of good musicians come from New Orleans, there's no doubt about. When you think of sort of the trumpet capabilities of, say, Louis or Red Allen, and well, it just goes on, it goes on.
Goes on.
Yeah.
Well, of course, when Bill Russell started to do these recordings with Bunk, there were one or two drummers, and Bill was a percussionist. He thought they weren't quite up to it. Baby Dogs, as you know, that time was in Chicago, so he brought Baby Dogs down just to make these recordings and add something to the newly formed Bunk band. So why don't we hear an example of this? You can hear him in action, bringing something to that band the way you did later with Ken Collier. This is Tiger Rag from 1944, done in a dance hall, a lovely echoey San Jacinto Hall.
It's a cross. It's not on the beat, it's a cross.
I've got China Boy with Bechet with Dogs doing two choruses.
Oh,
Yeah. We can go straight as well.
You introduced that.
I'm going back to school now.
What's it, boy?
I used to try and do that. And it writes for me. One more than let him in.
Marvellous. Marvellous.
What do you hear on that? What's going through your mind as you were listening to that?
Baby Dolls was under recording.
Well, I would agree.
I mean, it must be very hard if you don't listen to those tracks. You know, if you hear them for the first time, it must be quite a jumble. You know, I've listened to them for years and years and years, and picking out what he does, you know. But even listening to one instrument within that ensemble must be very hard because it's an overall sound, you know. It's just incredible. I hear it now as if I'm just learning to play drums, you know. It's so prodigious in its rhythmic attack and approach. I can't just describe it. Everything is across the beat. You can't say he's doing this, this and this and this, or he's playing, most like you talked to me about me playing paradiddles. I don't know I play paradiddles. But you can't hear anything, you can't hear paradiddles or three-stroke rolls or triplets in Baby Dolls playing. It's all mixed together. And that's the beauty of it. You can't define what he does because it's his concept of what all the rhythmic patterns should be.
Yeah.
It's actually, you can't copy it. It's impossible.
When you first heard Baby Dodds, I mean, speaking from my own experience, I heard Baby Dodds after I heard Gene Krupa, and you mentioned that the Chicagoans played on top of the beat. And when you hear Gene Krupa play triplets, or any of those guys play triplets, they're clean triplets. They're right on the beat, aren't they? Now, when I heard Baby Dodds playing those triplet rhythms on blocks, I thought, well, this is sloppy playing. But it's not, is it? Now, what's happening there?
I think he's listening to the musicians up front, and he's putting those patterns, as Louis said. Louis told off Catlett once, who had a row with Ella Fitzgerald, about, she said he'd stolen some of her beer or something. So Catlett, who was renowned for dropping marvellous bombs, you know, started dropping bombs all through Ella Fitzgerald's vocal, you see. And Louis said, stop playing in the windows. Now, the beauty about that is you can read into that, as a drummer, you're behind this wall of sound, right? And you're looking for slots.
Yeah.
You know, when you on these milliseconds, there's a gap and you get in it.
Yeah.
You know, and Baby does that all the time. So he'll start triplets across the beat, and he may even alter them to get into the beat for his next phrase. But you can't tell. You see, he's so natural with what he does. all the time. Last night I thought, my goodness me, it's all going on there, you know.
Would you agree that he is the most difficult of all of those drummers to try and get close to in you know, as far as we're trying to do that?
What, you're talking in that style?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. He's ahead of them all, really.
He was quite avant-garde, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, that's right. It was like Louis, I remember at Keswick one day, Benny Cohen was doing this tour, doing the Louis Armstrong Hot Fives and Sevens, and, you know, sadly, Benny Cohen died, and Enrico Tommaso was asked to do the show, and Enrico was sitting in the band room with the CDs of the Hot Fives, writing down everything Louis played. It was loads of paper, so he could, you know, I don't really know, you can remember things if you write it down, it's a trick. So what he was doing was writing the manuscript out. And he said to me, Louis is playing bebop in the 1926. All those Hot Fives and Sevens, the way the phrases are going, are all embryonic bebop, you know. And you can, so they were all doing it. Red Allen was doing it with the Louis Russell Band, you know, in 1929. You hear all these phrases that were there, so they were moving the goalposts.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the modern drummers was late for a session at what's the New York Birdland, I think it was, and they said to him, what was it? It wasn't Blakey, but it was one of the major modern drummers. And they said, well, where you been? You know, you're late. He said, I've been listening to Baby Dolls. I've been down the road in the nightclub listening to Baby Dolls.
Says it all, doesn't it?
You see, so it's all so closely linked, really.
Well, I think this would be a good time to hear that trio recording of Sidney Bechet with Baby Dodds done at a live concert. There are not too many Dodds solos on record, but we get a full 2 choruses on this one. This is China Boy.
I'll tell you something else about this at the end.
Now we're going to get in the groove a little bit. I think I'll tell you a little China Boy.
Baby thinks this is the end. played and finished it.
What about
Well,
that?
what are your reactions to that?
Well, you can't. Poetry. Superb playing. Superb. Imagine being there.
Yeah.
Crikey. So,
Could I ask you about when you had the first chance to play with a New Orleans musician? That's what I'd like to hear about, because I think many of us were present when that happened in this country. Is that right?
yeah.
So tell us what that was like for you. With
Fine.
George Lewis, wasn't it?
Like flying. It was. You can't. You didn't have to work at playing. You could just play. That St Philip Street breakdown. I was floating. I was, And George, there's a part on it where he shouts "yeah" out the side of his mouth. And I've tried to find it on the recording and I can't. But I know he did. He was about there,
Yeah, yeah.
And it was so easy to play with him. That was the most incredible thing. All right, you have the thing of it's wonderful to play with somebody that you've collected their records, blah 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 blah, But to actually play with him was incredible. It was. You can't describe it. It's like one of the Olympic runners winning, or Mo Farah winning those 2 marvellous races. How you ask him what was it like, but you can't really describe. It's indescribable. If you were a linguist or a writer, you might be able to put it down on paper. But it was just absolutely superb.
Of course, a couple of years later, you met George's drummer when he came over. Tell us a bit about that, Colin, because I think you became friends with Joe Watkins, didn't you?
Oh yeah, he was a lovely man. He was a lovely man. He gave me that. That's why it's on there. It's an old-fashioned damper, but because Joe gave it to me, I kept it on there. It was a lovely man. It really was.
How would you define his style?
Well, it was very simplistic, but drove like stink. I remember we did 2 concerts on the Dominion Tottenham Court Road on a Sunday, an afternoon concert and an evening concert. And when the George Lewis Band were playing their set in the afternoon, a drummer you may know, who's the drummer that played all the timpani?
Eric Delaney.
Eric Delaney. This drummer came in, and I saw it was Eric Delaney, and he stood behind Joe Watkins, who had a bass drum, a snare drum, 1 cymbal, and that was it. Or tom-tom, and no hi-hat. And Eric Delaney, I could see that he couldn't believe how Joe was swinging with just this basic drum kit. It is a young drummer who's studying drums at Manchester School. He's got his degree now, but he lives a few doors from me, and I played him some records, and I played him. I did a thing for the BBC with Little Brother Montgomery, and I just got somebody sent me the CD, and which hadn't been issued. It's a private recording, and basically I was just playing time behind this piano, and I said, I played him this. I said, you like blues music. This is what we were doing with the blues players in the 50s, you see. And but he said, how do you do that? I said, what do you mean, how do I do that? I said, well, you aren't. He said, I can't hear anything, but it's swinging underneath the piano player. He said, how do you do it? I said, I don't know. You just sit down and play. And he couldn't understand. And I can understand why Eric Delaney was standing behind Joe Watkins and watching Joe Watkins swinging like mad, which Eric Delaney had not a hope in hell of ever doing, but just doing what Eric Delaney could see was a 4/4 bass drum, right cymbal, and an offbeat with left hand. And there was Joe.
Now that's
punching
interesting,
the band like
because
mad.
you say that you've got, let's say you've got a guy that's got all this technique, and he's sitting there watching Joe Watkins, who's got very little technique, but he can't do what Joe Watkins is doing. Now, why is that?
You'd be worth £1 million. No, why? Why is there? All right. Why did I hear when I heard Nat King Cole Trio, early 50s? I'd never heard an English drummer playing like Lee Young, Leslie Young's brother, and he was just playing brushes and cymbals, but there was a feel to it.
Now, is that the African thing, the roots, the American thing?
I don't know.
The black thing. The black thing.
I don't know, because
did it change as well? Because if you go into Chicago in the mid-20s, by the time you get Tuff, Wetling and Krupa, who have listened to Baby Dodds and Zooty and all these guys in Chicago in the early 20s, you're getting them being able to approximate a style. It's different, but it's got that, I hear that same beat there that we didn't have over here.
I think a lot of it, the beat, I think if you lay back on the beat, you can widen the beat. You can widen the beat. You're playing a 4/4 bass drum, you can play a delayed cymbal.
Yeah.
Which Catlett did.
Yeah.
You know, and immediately do that, you broaden the beat out.
Yeah. So the beat is not there.
Oh no.
The beat.
Well, he's got it written down there somewhere.
Yeah.
About a guy talking about rhythm and beats, and it's not a vertical beat.
Yeah.
He described it as a whoosh whoosh. You know? And if you think on Freddie Green's guitar with the Count Basie band,
Yeah.
that's whoosh whoosh, and it's that way.
Yeah.
It's not that way. It's
Yeah.
not square.
Yeah.
I think. I mean, the African beat is. There's obviously something must be something in the genes, that's for sure, that are in. But you still got to hone it down. And I think the drummers we have. You think of the population of America, and in the 20s and 30s, the number of, for example, in inverted commas, black musicians that were in a deprived part of society, that being a musician was a way out. The competition to get to that stage would have been phenomenal. And so what we saw or what we heard on record was the cream.
Yeah.
You know, and this is why drummers like Baby Dodds and Catlett, well, all of them, if you took out any of them off those recordings and put them behind a kit in there, you'd go, you know, because they were so good, you know.
Well, we discovered another one, didn't we, Colin, from an early sound movie, who's not known today, but if you see him, it's a delight, and he did come to Britain. Tell them a bit about Freddie Crump, Colin. It's a name to consider.
But I discovered he was a drumming clown that could play. He was hilarious. He was a very funny man. And he danced around the kit when he played on the floor, played underneath the piano, and there's a lovely bit on this little short movie where he's standing at the back of the kit and he's going all on the beat, swinging like that. And it wasn't dubbed. You couldn't dub it in those days. You recorded and filmed at the same time. You know. And there's one bit where the piano player goes ding like that, and he goes like that, and he hits the top of the cymbal with his stick and comes back like that. You see. Well, I was watching a movie, a DVD of the Count Basie band with a drummer called Sonny Payne, who was something else. And there was a bit in this movie that the band's going along like a train, you know, and all of a sudden, Count Basie gets his little piano bit with a rhythm section, he's going, and he's just doing the odd note here and there. One bit, Basie goes, like that, you see. And immediately he does it, you see Sonny Payne, luckily he's in camera, and you see Sonny Payne go, he spins a stick and goes. And he's obviously he's seen this movie. He must have done.
Yeah.
And he goes back. Wonderful.
Well, you've linked dancing with drumming. Now, wasn't Joe Jones a tap dancer earlier on, I think? You often get that link, don't you?
Yeah. Oh, there was a documentary on New York tap dancers, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Baby Dogs Woodblock Play. I tell you, who's the guy that came over from America?
Merce Cunningham.
No.
His dogs worked with him.
He was down. He was in the Hungry Club.
Dancer.
Yeah.
Will Gaines.
Will Gaines.
Will Gaines.
When you
tap
listen to
dancer.
Will Gaines tap dancing,
Yeah.
you heard Baby Dodd's woodblock play. So Baby Dodd's got all his woodblock playing from other people's feet.
But what about
You
that?
know, what they look like, I don't know.
All the connections.
What about some of the other drummers that were in New Orleans? Black Happy, for example.
Oh dear, yeah. Oh, well, you're picking the good ones. He was incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
you see, there's so few recordings of them, and again, I'm not a technician. You studied all that. Can you hear any what you call academic patterns?
Yeah.
You
Yes,
can.
I can hear academic patterns in Baby Dods, but they're not as you would play them out the book. So when Baby Dods is playing those rim rhythms that we were listening to on those, he's playing correct things like paradiddles and flams and rolls and all of that. But he's putting a unique sort of time in them. And we've got a little clip of Black Happy, and I could ask you what you think about that once we've heard it. But you'll hear in the middle of this solo that when he's rolling on the snare drum, you'll hear him play a series of what they call 5-stroke rolls, which is mummy, daddy, mum. You know, da 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 da. But it's at quite a rapid speed. You'll hear him crossing the beat with this, and this is the Black Happy clip.
Is this a Celestial thing?
Yeah. Those rolls in there. There's your This is the 5 strokes. And again.
I'm not going to play today. I didn't like the band, but the drum was marvellous.
Wonderful stuff.
So what do you hear in that, Colin?
Too much. Oh dear, how could you describe it? I mean, it's but you can imagine how there was a set of drummers in New Orleans that were, what's the word, much more adventurous, if you like, as Baby Doz was, you know. But Ken Colley told me about Harry Golson. He said he was fantastic. I'd love to have seen him live, you know. to describe it is, you see, they're all so slightly different in his approach to those patterns. I mean, I've heard that recording many times, and I noticed how when you start talking about 5-stroke roll, I immediately hear it in sections.
Yeah.
And I should go home and sort of say, let's have a listen to this again, you know. Like,
But you do that. You do something very similar to that when you take solos. You've got those snare patterns.
yeah, I can't copy the technique, but I'll try and get something from the sound.
Yeah.
As I said before, I can't count, so I ask you what I do, but I'll get it from I'll get it from the sound. So that
Yeah.
that was the flow.
Now, when we first met, going back to about 1971 or 72, it was at the Railway Hotel in Bishop Stortford that Bill Cornell over there organised, and you were down there and you let me sit in on your drums. I just started playing them, and do you remember what you told me?
No.
You
I
told
probably took the camera off.
Well, no, you should have done. But you told me then, in those days, and I'm curious to know whether if you were starting again, whether you would do anything differently, because you told me then that I should go off and learn the rudiments and learn the technique properly, because you said that you were up on the bandstand and you can hear things that you want to do, but you can't execute them. You can't execute them.
No.
Now, if you were starting again, would you do that? Would you do it the academic way?
I probably would.
Yeah. And do you think that would have affected the way that you play natural? Because you are a natural musician. You've got that natural pulse to your playing.
Well,
But I think you can't make academic.
maybe, I don't know. When I turned pro with Ken, I thought about going to a drum teacher, but I knew that I'd be told that Baby Dolls was rubbish, and New Orleans jazz was rubbish, and you should be playing like Gene Krupa and Buddy Rich and Max Roach and things like that, you know. Which didn't, you know, I'm not belittling all that, that's marvellous, but I wanted to retain that sound.
Yeah.
And so I was scared to go to somebody that was going to say, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be tuning your drums this way, you should, you know, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I'd heard this sound, I'd heard that, you know, when I was young, maybe, and that sound was blazing in my head, and I wasn't going to let it go.
But the interesting thing is, because you regarded by many as being typecast as a New Orleans style drummer, but I've heard you, and in fact I've put you into situations where you've been taken out of what you could be regarded as your normal comfort zone, because I remember putting you on at a festival, I think at Scarborough some years ago, with Trevor Whiting and I think it was Nick Dawson, and doing a sort of a swingy mainstream thing.
Yeah.
And you know who you sounded like similar to in that? You sounded similar to Big Sid.
Yeah,
because you've got that concept of that wide space, you know, that big broad beat, and it was so relaxed and so exciting.
Yeah, well that would figure, because I would go by sounds.
Yeah.
And if they were playing that sound, then I've got my bag for that sound. So it's, as you say, it's the context you're put into that you play to. So you don't ram it down. I mean, who said they were with the New Orleans drummer that sat in with the Bill Brunskill band once, and he played so loud the band couldn't hear themselves.
I was there.
Because
We were loud.
because and I said to Mike that probably he was so nervous about what he was doing, if he played loud, he couldn't hear anybody else that would throw him. Yeah, people play like that. The musicians that don't listen to other musicians, you know, that they'll get on the mic, and it can be a frontline musician or a bass player, guitar player. They'll have their amp turned up so they can play to themselves and not listen to the others because it throws them, so they don't get in with the band.
Well, that's an interesting lead, because so when you're playing, and we'll see you playing today, you but there's something going on there, because I've seen you and I've seen the way that you work, and you are listening all the time, aren't you? And you're reacting all the time.
Yeah, trying to keep up. They're all younger fellas, you know. No, you got to listen to the others, because you don't know. Well, if you don't listen to the others, you don't have fun, do you? Really? No. You don't get any feedback. It's like one-way conversation. It's like sitting around a table and one person shouting. You don't have a conversation, do you?
It is a conversation, musically, isn't it?
Yeah.
With the best bands.
I know a lot of people a lot better through their music than I do them talking to them.
Good point.
You know, you don't need to talk to people sometimes. I don't know why I'm here now.
Well, we haven't got a lot longer, but dare we ask you about some of your other favourite drummers? Because I know you've got many favourites, other people you like listening to and perhaps are inspired by.
Well, I mean, you know, Catlett, it goes in recording sessions, actually. You hear a recording and you think, wow. With Catlett, it was the Louis Armstrong All-Stars, and they got the mic in a freak position for the drums, and you heard Catlett properly, you know. And then the next thing I heard, I got hold of Orgy in Rhythm by Art Blakey, which is, I think it's Art Blakey, Joe Jones, Specs Wright, Arthur Taylor on drum kits, or Specs Wright might be on timpani, and the rest was Herbie Mann on piano, Wendell Marshall on bass, and then I think there's about a dozen Latin American musicians, and that is tremendous, you know. There was a double LP of that, and that I started listening to Art Blakey, and of all the modern drummers, I like him the best, you know. He had these tremendous tone, really good sound, you know. But you see, a lot of it depends upon the recording. I never used to like Max Roach because I'd got a little CD, I think it was Billy Eckstein doing St. Louis Blues or something like that, and it was machine gun drumming. And what I didn't realise was that the engineers had taken all the bass out of his drums, and it was all top, so the drums sounded hard and harsh. And then somebody gave me an LP of Clifford Brown, recorded in Paris with Max Roach, and they do a thing called Parisian Thoroughfare. You ever heard that? Oh, and Max Roach is a dream. All the tones of his drums are right. You know, it's recordings have. I remember talking to Benny Golson, the American alto, modern alto player. We were on a cruise somewhere, and he was in one band, and we were at the bar talking about our early days, and we were talking about hearing things on record, you know, and he said, well, when I was a young boy, I used to go and stand outside a club and listen to Charlie Parker and Dizzy Gillespie live, you know, and I said, yeah, well, the whole of England especially, were listening to your music via records. You know, there were a few bebop records, there were a few Dixieland records, sort of, and Hot Fires and Sevens, and I think there were about 30 when I first started getting the major labels, and that was all. And you based all your concepts of American music on that until you heard them live. Of course, when you heard them live, that's better. Obviously, you know, once the Stones and the Beatles started being able to be sold to America, you've got a bigger flow, and I don't think the union's quite as strong now, but they just literally blocked. As here in America, if you went to Paris, you're all right.
Yes.
You'd hear people, but generally speaking, it was just in a few records that you based all your style and your concept on. So the drum bit is what records you heard.
And it's also distorted by the fact that those early recordings, the drums weren't recorded at all, were they?
No, freak recordings. Yeah. Catlett had a freak recording. Baby Dolls, you could say, had a freak recording. Just the ambience of that room, and where, although I must admit, Bill Russell would have tried to set it up so he was picking Dodds up.
But if you think about the Oliver Band recordings,
you see, Baby couldn't play a drum kit. I don't even know whether he had a drum kit in the studio. Probably did, but he wouldn't be able to play bass drum or.
We get an idea of that, don't we, from those Black Bottom Stompers sessions a couple of years later with Johnny Dodds, and you hear that bass drum recorded. And Baby said that he played. Joe wanted 2 beats, didn't he, on the bass drum, and Louis wanted 4.
That's right. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, the Oliver Band. Well, you could say it was a 2-beat band. But you see, the Oliver Band didn't sound like a Dixieland 2-beat band or a New Orleans 2-beat band. He had that was
True.
And some of the Oliver tunes are 2-beat, they're written in 2/4, but they don't sound ploddy or club-footed, as I said. It's, no, rhythm's a very, very subtle thing that you. As Ellington said, his classic is you don't mean the thing you ain't got that swing.
Yeah.
But then you come to this, what is swing? What is Dixieland? What is New Orleans? It's all a mixture, really. And it's only certain recordings that give it its style. I mean, look, you take a group of New Orleans musicians make the Bunk records, right? You take Bunk out, and you take Baby Dodds out, and you've got the George Lewis Band. Completely different rhythmic sound. And that, again, it's a funny thing to say, I'm splitting hairs, it's not criticising, but it gives you some indication of the vertical beat and the horizontal beat, as it's referred to, this whoosh-whoosh business. The Bunk Band had more whoosh-whoosh than the George Lewis Band, because the George Lewis Band was a punching band, and it goes to the drummer. Joe Watkins was a much more on the beat drummer. Baby was a laid back. He played his bass drum, and all his other patterns were not behind the beat. Well, they were, but they were because they're so broad. You still about Catlett symbol. It's way behind the beat,
You tend with Baby Dodds normally, with what you can hear on records, certainly the Mark Carey New Yorkers, which are very well recorded, you can hear that relentless 4-beat bass drum going all the time. Yeah. And with Zooty, it's the same. You've got that 4-beat thing going all the time. Joe is doing something different, isn't he, in the Lewis Band, because you've got funny little skip beats on the bass drum with him.
I suppose you could say there was the parade band licks. I don't know. I'd have to sit with you on that and listen to see what you're getting at. Because you always think of Joe Watkins as a punching on-top drummer. Well, he played in big bands, didn't he? It's
early on, possibly.
Yeah. And so Joe was sort of pushing the beat. Baby Dolls was playing laid back.
Yeah. Well, Joe was in parade bands, wasn't he? Joe was in parade bands, wasn't he?
Yeah. See, Happy Golson plays behind the beat.
Yeah. And Happy's playing 2-beat bass drum in the ensemble on that, but you notice that when he took that solo, it goes to 4, doesn't it?
Yeah. I suppose this brings us, if you like, round to what we have today, the modern so-called street beat approach. What do you think of that and the way that's, if you like, progressed?
It progressed so far, and then it's got too beboppy. It's got too complex, and so the rhythm of the brass band is lost to my mind. It's very clever, and it's a contemporary sound, but it's not like the old. I suppose time changes things, but it's not like the older, more swinging New Orleans marching bands,
Not like the Eureka used to be.
The Eureka, yeah. It's like modern bass drum playing is not for the time in the band. They take their time for the right cymbal, and the bass drum is all accents. If it's all accents, you haven't got the pulse. You've got the pulse of the right cymbal, right? Well, Baby Doll's his pulse. It's not the top of his kick. It's his bass drum. It's depending which style you play. It's both are right. But in an Orleans parade band, they've taken that bass drum to the bebop stage, really, where it's not producing a lovely pulse for the band to sit on to march to. And it can be broken up a little bit, but I think some irritation probably. I think they've gone a bit too far, trying to chop the beat about. There's something beautiful about a New Orleans band swinging, marching band swinging, and with that street beat, as I say. I mean, playing the street beat is okay if it's not too complex. It's when it gets too complex that the bit goes out of it.
Lose the heart of it, I suppose.
Yeah. You'd have to ask Baby Dons about that.
Well, Colin, I think, how are we doing for time?
It's about 11.
About that. We got time we due to finish this at all?
I'd rather carry on.
Yeah. Well, what I'd like to do is, I remember when we were at Stratford last year, I think I put this in the forum, which you weren't on, and it was the recording that you did with George Lewis, with Ken's band, and the audience literally applauded after they'd heard that, and this is with the CD that comes with Mike's book on Ken, and I put this on, and I actually couldn't believe it, because it's getting this close to the real sound of New Orleans drums. And I think we had a conversation sometime. I asked you how close you thought that you got to it. So how close do you think you actually got to that feel of the New Orleans?
After last night, nowhere. I tell you, I went to school last night. Oh, yeah.
But you see, that's not what comes over, because if you listen to a lot of the records that were around in the 50s of the British bands, we had one of Hump's band in the forum yesterday, and the rhythm section was quite wooden. And again, listening to that CD that Mike put together to go with the book, you can hear when Ken goes to New Orleans, it's got that beat. There's that down-home beat to it. Then he comes back and he's playing with the Barber Band, and it sounds like jazz with the jazz taken out. It's very, very straight rhythm, nothing's happening. And then all of a sudden, you're in the band and the whole thing explodes. And that's down, I think, largely to what you've taken in and what you've absorbed and what you're putting back into your playing.
Maybe, I don't know.
So shall we have a listen to Weary Blues, please, on the from the Collier session.
Got the bass drum nice.
Yeah.
Good night.
You remember that?
Yeah.
What do you remember about that?
Well, it was a pretty good night. It was fabulous. Fabulous. That little man, G-Biz. Colossal player. A gentleman as well.
Yeah. Colin Bowden, ladies and gentlemen. Mike Pointon. And you can now hear Colin do it.
Thanks for being so patient.